From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Hello. I talked to a lot of you out in the lobbies and in the rooms and everything else. The world of microbiology has been avoided and has been overlooked for many, many years. We've concentrated on re-engineering the soil structure, the chemistry of the soil, but very few people have ever looked at the life in the soil or the lack of life in the soil. I tend to say that I like to look to nature. How does nature relate to soil microbiology? How does nature take care of the microbiology problems that exist in soil? And so I don't feel like I'm inflicting my limited knowledge on microbes on the agricultural community. I feel that I'm trying to convey what Mother Nature would want us to do in these whole realms of the microbiology. I have an example that I just love to talk about is a leafcutter ant. Anybody familiar with the leafcutter ant? Okay. The leafcutter ant chops up little leaf pieces and puts them in piles and feeds them to a fungus that lives in the soil. And that's the fungus is the food for the leafcutter ant. He doesn't eat the leaf. He just feeds it to a fungus first. Now, occasionally they get a disease organism, another microfungus moves in, and it disrupts the food supply for the ant. So the ant carries on his body a streptomyces bacteria that produces an antibiotic that prevents that invading other fungi from invading the colonies of fungus that the ant's culturing. Clever little creatures. It's kind of incredible what they do. And so in that whole process, the ant's been doing this for some 50 million years, culturing. And then he goes on, if he has to establish another colony, he carries a little bit of that microfungus on some leaf debris over to his next colony. It's kind of like starting sourdough batches for sourdough bread. You take it from batch to batch to batch to batch. Well, the leafcutter ants do that all the time. And it's kind of interesting because my question is on that, we use antibiotics today, and we develop resistance strains to the antibiotics. How's the ant been doing this for some 50 million years? Transferring culture, transferring, using the streptomyces species on its body to defend its own colony, its own friendly fungus. How's it doing that? Why is it doing that? Have you ever thought maybe perhaps it was because it wasn't a product of the standardization from the drug companies? Or what's causing that to be so successful? But it's amazing what happens in Mother Nature. When we standardize stuff and standardize antibiotics and everything else and do a single-shot antibiotic, it upsets our system. It upsets the microbiology of the system. I have a human health products company, and I ask people if they've ever had antibiotics in their life. If they have, their microbiology is out of whack in their digestive system. Then organisms like Candida come into place. Candida is an organism that overwhelms probably 80 to 90% of the American population. Candida has all kinds of side symptoms and side dangers in the body. It's a precursor for cancer. It's a precursor for AIDS. In other words, it has to be present in your body before AIDS will attack your body. So what's that telling us? The immune system is under attack by the Candida, basically. The Candida cannot be conquered by the human immune system. The Candida can only be conquered by other microbial species. So there's these relationships that we need to learn how to pay attention to. Let's start with the first overhead here. Most of us have lost sight of what's going on in agriculture. 80% of all plant dry matter comes from the air, and only 20% comes from the soil. So guess what, people? All this fuss we have about nutrition and everything else, we're only able to affect 20% of that plant growth material. Now, the problem occurs here, and I usually have something I can stick across this, but I don't have it. One of the problems occurs here if you limit that root mass by a hard pan. Say there's a theoretical hard pan going across here, and you only have development of 50% of the root mass. What are you doing to that plant? Pretty severely inhibiting its nutrition uptake, but for only 20% of that nutrition that it takes to build this plant. The plant mass is always equal above ground and below ground, and this is dry weight mass, by the way. And it's supposed to be equal genetically. However, we find in reality in most of our agricultural systems, we're putting in a hard pan layer here, and we create a problem. The root system cannot expand, cannot penetrate to the areas that it should. You're limiting its mining ability, its ability to access minerals by reducing its roots mass, basically. Now, when it gets to the microbiology of the soil, we have lots of soils that the minerals are there, but the plant can't access it. Potassium is a famous one. This particular test was done for the University of Idaho. They have an area in North Idaho where they could not get potassium in the soil. They could not get it in the plant either. They would put potassium chloride, potassium sulfate at high levels on the soil, and I mean very high levels. They had put over 450 pounds of potassium sulfate on the soil. They'd analyze it 2 weeks later, absolutely no potassium. And their potassium level was running actually in the original soils that they brought in was running about 70 parts per million, which was classed as low. Now, what they did, they brought us in samples, 10-pound size samples. We mixed them all together, so we had a homogeneous group of soil sample. Then we separated them back into 10-pound samples. We inoculated one sample with 1 gram of microbes, which is a very small amount of microbes. This is a broad spectrum range microbe mix that we manufacture. We put them in the incubator, the other half of the sample in the incubator, and for 15 days. Took them out, reanalyzed them. The control was showing 70 parts per million. Calcium was at 989. The other things to look at here was sulfur at 12 parts per million or low, manganese at 12 parts per million, not too good to write home about, and copper was low. After that short time period of 15 days, look what happened to the potassium. 200 parts per million potassium in here. Some of the other gains were in magnesium went up to 82 parts per million versus 69 parts per million. The calcium, ironically, remained the same. And we'll address why it says high here and medium here in a minute. The pH, however, the sodium went up also. Sodium is a cation, and it was locked up also in that soil. The hydrogen here, the pH went down from 6.1 to 5.8. Not necessarily favorable, but it's all explainable why it happened here, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The hydrogen went from 0.9 in that cation exchange to 1.4. The CEC went from 6.7 to 7.7. A dramatic change in CEC. Usually we don't see them happen quite that fast. Now, on the nitrogen factor, nitrogen was at 22 parts per million. It went up to 38 parts per million. We employ free-form nitrogen fixers in our mixes, azotobacters, azotospirillum, some of these. They can take the nitrate or nitrogen gas out of the air, change it into usable nitrates for the plant. Sulfur was a dramatic change. 12 parts per million here went to 96 parts per million, or very high. Zinc went from 0.7 to 2 parts per million. Manganese went from 12 parts per million to 42 parts per million. Iron went down from 48 to 23, and it's explainable why that happens too. Copper, no change, and boron, no change. We never see a microbial responsive change usually in the copper and the boron. I'll say that right up front. I've never seen it happen. Now, back to this, why the calcium here at 989 is high and here at 989 is medium is simply because of the CEC. The CEC went up here, and so it takes more it would take more calcium theoretically to balance this out based on this CEC. The other factor that occurred showing that pH drop was this was a low hydrogen factor. This was a higher hydrogen factor. And what are we measuring when we measure pH? Hydrogen ions. So why is this one higher hydrogen? In the organic matter, and I didn't have room, and I thought of it later, I just made this up before we came, I didn't have room to have the organic matter on here. But in the organic matter complex, we have cellulose. Cellulosic fibers are nothing but sugars. In breaking down the cellulosic fibers into sugars, then the sugars are broken down enzymatically by the plant or by the microbes. Okay, break the sugars down. One of the byproducts of sugar. Anybody remember a high school chemistry experiment where you take a glass full of sugar, just white sugar, pour some sulfuric acid over it, and what happens? You get this steamy cloud coming out of it. You get this large carbon chunk, looks like a part of a volcanic stone, just raises up out of it. You've got pure carbon left in that cone when the sulfuric acid reacts with that, and there's water generated at a high level off of that whole mix. So when microbes pull apart sugars, there's what we call metabolic water developed in that whole equation. Hence, this sample here, whoop, wrong button. This sample here was much wetter than this sample here, because this one here, the microbial activity started breaking apart the organic matter and started breaking apart the sugars, leaving some metabolic water. As the sample became wetter, the hydrogen concentrations in that wetter sample went up. As a consequence, the pH goes down. So that's an example. Now, if you're sampling a field and you get it too wet, expect to have a high hydrogen factor in your cation exchange. And that's one of the errors that people look at when they look at a sample. They'll say, well, I've only got 50% calcium in base saturation, but yeah, I got 22% hydrogen in that. It was a real wet sample. So that throws the whole equation off. You've got to calculate that hydrogen factor back down to zero in order to understand what the balance of the other cations are. So when you got into a drier climate situation, that you'd have a balanced soil. So anyway, this is what microbes did in 15 days in these samples. And the University of Idaho had concocted this marvelous story to the growers that this area had a peculiar geological occurrence happen, and that there was this mysterious sump, and potassium would never become available. And we proved it could be available there in that slide by simply adding microbes. Now, where was it? Why couldn't they chemically extract it? Why couldn't they analyze for it? It happened to be there was two peculiar crystalline structure forms in the soil. One is called a tetrahedron form of soil particle. The other one's an octahedron. The two surfaces slap together. They lock together energetically. They're very difficult to take apart. Guess where the potassium goes? In that soil, the potassium gets wedged in between those tetrahedron, octahedron surfaces. They can't chemically extract it at that point. So, but microbes have the capability of producing enzymes to open that up, extract the potassium. It's simple. So a lot of soils we see a microbial addition to the soil, suddenly we get a higher level of minerals available. And a neat trick that I used to do, and I did it on a lot of things, take all those figures, those gain figures that we had, calculate them out for dollars and cents. How many pounds of potassium does that parts per million interpret into? And how many pounds of sulfur? How many pounds of manganese, a difficult and expensive element to put on? How many pounds of zinc do you get? And put dollars and cents figures on it. It makes your biology or your microbial addition extremely cheap that you put on there, because you've more than gained nutrition. Now, for many years, we've clocked before the farmer plants, after the farmer harvests on annual crops. What is the nutrition value in the soil? And in every case, when you manage your microbiology, your soil is in better shape after you harvest the crop and go for 1 calendar year growing a crop, your nutrient value is much greater than what you started with in the beginning. Some of the major gains are in your phosphates. Your P1 phosphates will usually go through the roof in 1 calendar year. P2s go up, and everybody says, well, P2s can't go up, but they do. So we have a major gain in phosphates by managing the microbiology in that soil every year. We used to put a dollar and cents value on it. It ranged anywhere from $40 to $150 an acre worth of nutrition that we were getting back at the end of the year after we harvested and sold our crop off of it. So now that's a sustainable agricultural system. And back to the original picture with 50% of the plant above ground, 50% of the plant below ground, there should never, and only 20% of the nutrition for that coming from the soil, there should never be a declining organic matter factor in a soil. Never. No matter how your management program is. But unfortunately, agriculture has lived with declining organic matters. I deal with organic matters in California, less than 1% organic matter in the soil. I see soils where the farmers say, hey, we used to be at 5% or 4% organic matter. Today, it's at only maybe 1 or 1.5% organic matter. They're burning up the soil. They're mining the soils, basically, with what they're doing. Now, 99% of all agricultural soils that we start with, if you've been a conventional farmer, the microbiology is very messed up. Yeah, you have microbes in that soil. In a few cases, a few years ago, we found total sterile soil from a neat chemical that was put out as a herbicide for wheat. The laboratories that we were sending samples to, we sent a lot of samples to different laboratories because nobody could believe that we had zero microbial activity. They could not monitor microbes in these soil samples. We found them, we logged, I think, 7 sites in Washington, 2 sites in Oregon, 1 site in Idaho. Not any of them had any microbial life in them. What we clocked is if they put on a chemical as a herbicide, anywhere from 1 application, 5 to 7 years before that, the microbial balance in the soil or the microbial life in the soil could not recover. Now, we pointed that out rather ungracefully, and I was threatened with a lawsuit over the whole thing. However, I had done my homework. The chemical was pulled off the market 6 months later because it was creating a total sterile condition in that soil environment. If the product was used once, now the chemical company had the ability to come up with analogs very quickly. In other words, a similar type of chemical, which they were out there expounding to the growers that it was less destructive on the soil microbiology. Excuse me. It's less destructive, but it's still extremely destructive. They didn't say what level of destructiveness they were talking about. So we find these things happening all the time. So what I did quite a few years ago, saying, if I'm going to work in agriculture, I have to have a way to put everything on an equal equation before I can start working with nutrition in plants and everything else. So I started developing microbial complexes. The first thing I headed for was find the silver bullet. There's got to be a microbe that's going to be the miracle microbe will cure all of agricultural ailments. It'll control every disease known to man. I should have been smart enough at the time, but I wasn't. And I found that there was no such thing after a great many years of work looking for the magic bullet. I then decided to turn to Mother Nature and find out what is going on here in a soil environment, what's going on in the natural environment. I went to a nurse log. I may have told this at other meetings in the forest. Nurse log, it was in a northwest climate. We had 20 below zero. It was high on a mountain at a state park.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kempf, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kempf, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show.
The nurse log, I logged the enzyme activity in that nurse log. When it was cold, wet, 20 below zero, we took samples. Digestion was going on in that log when it was 20 below zero. When it was dry in the summertime, 100 degrees, very dry, no moisture, digestion was still occurring in that log, and the log was damp and wet in there. There was all this sugar being broken apart out of the cellulose, and the microbes were producing their own water to be able to exist. What we discovered, regardless of what the environmental conditions were, was worth its weight in gold to us. It was what happened in that whole realm. Over here, when it was cold and wet, the Pseudomonas were the functional microbes. They could take that cold climate and still be functioning. They became predominant in that log during that time period. As the spring came and the moisture came up, then some of the fungi on the surface became predominant in that. Or late in the fall, as the moisture came up, some of the fungi became predominant in that digestion process. During the summer dry heat time period, the bacillus groups suddenly became the predominant groups. Did the others die? No. They just declined in their importance in that whole stage play. And I relate this like a play. Different groups, different actors come out in a play to complete the whole story, and that's what happens with the microbes. Their goal was to digest that log and use it as a food source. But they moved over when the environment didn't suit them, the moisture didn't suit them, all these conditions were wrong. And let one of the other microbes go and do the job. So it raised my interest and said, can I create multiple microbe mixes that will get along with each other and can go out into the environment and be there when the conditions are such that that will be adapted? And the answer ultimately was yes, and that's what we've created. I set out to create a Cadillac product, and the Cadillac product is called Biogenesis. Let's have the next slide here. Oh, you've got it up here already. Okay, go ahead. This particular project, however, wasn't with Biogenesis. Enzymes. I keep pushing the wrong button on this. This is Pepzyme G. Pepzyme is an enzyme byproduct from microbial growing, basically. Microbes don't have mouths. They have to produce enzymes to digest anything that they eat. Without enzymes, there would be no life on Earth, period. We cannot function without enzymatic activity in our body. We would die. Enzymes are the materials that draw in energy to cause a reaction to occur within the body or in the digestive system or within the cell. Now, what we did, we had enzymes extracted from microbes. We would apply the enzymes to the field because it would suddenly trigger breakdown of organic debris. Suddenly there was an easy food supply for indigenous microbes. They would start feeding on it. The indigenous microbe populations would start going up very heavily. And we took that approach to begin with. So we did some control studies here. I was always against putting fertilizer on alfalfa. How many in here are alfalfa growers? Okay. How many put fertilizer on your alfalfa? Okay. Out in the West, they have to get 5 to 7 cuttings in order to be able to make it economical. And they push this alfalfa with huge amounts of fertilizer. They don't take into account that we have a legume here that's able to fix nitrogen by itself. They dump it on instead. And that they put huge levels of phosphate on, not realizing that the plant has to have mycorrhizal colonies colonize the root system to be overly productive. And so they do two things that destroy the plant's natural ability. The nitrogen stops the nitrogen fixing capability of the normal plant's character. Number two, the phosphates inhibit mycorrhizal colonies on that, or from colonizing that root system, and the plant gets in trouble. It becomes an addict, a junkie. We have to feed it once we've started it that way. And so I was trying to convince these farmers that they didn't need it. All they needed to do was stimulate the native microorganisms in the soil, the native mycorrhizal to colonize that root system of the alfalfa, and they would produce a quality alfalfa. This guy had found this by accident. He was feeding lambs, and he'd take a bale out of the treated field inadvertently. He had them piled outside in a barn or under cover sheds. And he'd take a bale, feed it to his lambs. The lambs would stand there bawling. They were still hungry. He'd take a bale out of the other side the next day, feed it to his lambs. The lambs would clean it up, and they were satisfied. They'd wander off. They were happy. And he noticed that after 3 or 4 weeks and said, Bruce, you got to come down here and you got to take samples of these two and analyze them and see what's going on. In the analytical, this is what we came up with. Now, this is just a zero calculated factor. This was the actual moisture factor. This is the biological on this side. If you calculate it out at 0%, then everything is equal on the moisture, basically. And this is the control on this side. The moisture percent was a little higher in the control than it was in the biological. The crude protein, however, on a corrected moisture, zero moisture level, was 18.18 versus 13.47 over here. A significant protein difference. Digestible protein, 13.2 versus 9.05. Significant difference. Fat levels. Fats are necessary for animal energy. 1.75 versus 1.25. So this goes on and on. Now, the big change was here in fiber. 2.67 versus 42.5. Much less fiber in ours, biological side. Now, did that represent lower tonnage? No, it did not. We got a better tonnage overall on our biological than they did on the control. But the animal was showing that response. Have you ever taken high fiber grass hay that's just fiber and fed it to an animal, give him a high leaf density hay over here? What does he do? He picks the leaves off first. A lot of horses will do that. They'll pick all the leaves off and they don't want to eat that high fiber stem because they don't feel they can obtain enough nutrition out of it. They instinctively know what's good for them. But man doesn't pay too much attention. Horse, eat it anyway. Just leave it out there until he eats it all. So mineral balance in the thing. The sulfur in percents, 0.17% versus 0.07. Phosphorus, 0.20, 0.23. Now, higher phosphorus, yes, in the control. He did put phosphorus on there, on the control side. He didn't put it on the treated side. Potassium, it was a higher potassium level, and it goes right down the line. I won't bore you with going through all of these. We followed up because always, this doesn't tell us the whole story. We have to look at the amino acid balance. Let's take the next one. The amino acid balance in these things and the vitamin balance, and I brought just the amino acid balance in here and not the vitamin today because I realize I've only got an hour for this presentation. The amino acid balance on the conventional versus the biological. Every one of the amino acids were at a higher level in these proteins than was the control. And that's the real story of this. The quality of that alfalfa was satisfying to that animal. He was going to have better growth, and the animal's sensory perception said, hey, I'm full, I have enough, I don't need to eat a bunch more of this stuff. And it follows all the way through. Now, while we're looking at this, the glutamic acid up here is kind of an interesting one. If you have an annual crop of corn, soybeans, or whatever, or corn for silage, and you want to mess this one up, just put too much nitrogen on. This glutamic acid in the proteins will go through the roof. And when you get this from a point less than 1%, all of a sudden it becomes 50% of that amino acid structure. Guess what? All of these are short. Now, we've logged this on corn, on silage corn. The guy kept putting on more and more nitrogen. As he put on more nitrogen, the glutamic acid went through the roof. Most of these weaker ones that are fairly low, the arginine, the leucine, the valine, some of these things, they started disappearing out of that whole equation. Diseases in people and amino acid balance. Lou Gehrig's disease, incurable disease. Guess what happens in the individual? They can't process in their body or can't manufacture, or if you can feed them to them, and they can get them, but they can't manufacture the short-chain branched amino acids, the isoleucine, the valine, and the leucine. And that's one of the precursors for identifying that you have Lou Gehrig's disease, because you're not going to be able to have those in your body, basically. So how important is this amino acid analysis? I think it's a trigger that we need to look at as an organic organization, as a non-organic organization. These nutrient analyses are extremely critical for us. And I'm the one that stands up here and says, organic is not the answer. Conventional is not the answer. We need to develop a system that says we have nutritionally balanced food, period. And how we're going to judge and determine that nutritional balance is extremely critical, because we will be watched from all over the world as the health of the individual goes up because he's eating nutritionally balanced food. So, now, in this soil scenario, I've had several people say, one guy from Manitoba says, well, practicing your program, but this year we got so much rain and the water's all sitting on top, we had to harvest our oats in 6 inches of water, and we just skimmed the tops off the oats because there was water underneath. I said, hey, there's a problem. You got a problem with penetration and hard pans. He says, yeah, I know. We got problems with hard pans. So we did this study quite a few years ago, just using microbial designed enzymes that came from microbes, basically, or derived from microbes. And we looked at what happens if we put one application of enzymes on the soil. Treated soils, average reduction in hardness. There was a 30% change in hardness. These were treated and controlled areas. Now, this isn't just off of one field. This is off of 20 farms in Colorado. And at 5 centimeters, we had a 37% reduction, 10 centimeters, a 23% reduction, 15 centimeters, 14% reduction. I gave this in Europe a few years ago, so that's why everything's in centimeters. 30 centimeters, we had a 9.6% reduction in hardness. Just one enzyme application during the season did this to our soil. Now, we use this kind of approach for golf courses. You got a hard pan on your green. What happens? You got a hard spot. They water the green for a certain time. The water sits there. It doesn't penetrate. It evaporates off. A few hours later, the grass is starting to dry because it's dehydrating, because it's short of water. It didn't get it through the surface. 2 applications of the enzymes, 1 month apart. Guess what? There's no hard pan. It solves it. You have uniform watering, uniform acceptance, uniform drainage. It solves the problem. Soil pHs. 48 Washington farms, we had 1 pepsime application is all we had. Now, these are averages of the extremes, okay? In the low pH realm, the controls, we went from 6.1, an average of these farms, we went to a 6.32. On the high pH soils, we went from 7.45, we dropped them down to 7.18. What this began to tell us was that the microbiology of the soil will adjust the soil pH from these high extremes or low extremes if they're given a chance to work that way. I work in agricultural areas where they got soil pHs in extreme levels all over the place, from 9 pHs down to 3 pHs in soils. You ever seen a plant grow successfully in a 3 pH soil? Mm-mm. Or I got alfalfa fields that the grower says, boy, Bruce, I planted this alfalfa. It gets 6 inches tall and never grows anymore. Look at his pH, 4.5. The soil's in trouble when it's down in those realms. Now, put your microbial applications on, or put an enzyme solution on there if he hasn't been a heavy chemical user, and stimulate the indigenous microbes. They'll start bringing that soil into what they determine as a balanced scenario. We looked at things like water infiltration. There's some Montana farms here, some Colorado Montana here, Colorado here, some Iowa farms that were included in the project. And again, these are averages. The controls started out here, and this is what it went to. We had some high pH soils. This is what it went to. We don't have any real extremes there. Well, a 7.94 is getting pretty extreme, but the application of enzymes did bring that soil down too. Now, the other thing we looked at was depth of water infiltration, and that's a screwball study. Take a piece of 6-inch aluminum pipe, hammer it down into the ground, fill it full of measured amount of water, and time its percolation through that. So we found in that whole thing there was 63% less water infiltration time where we had treated the ground versus our controls. And the water penetrated 13% deeper in there. That 63% less water infiltration time would solve most of the problem for this grower in Manitoba. It would get that water off the surface so he wouldn't have a swamp on the surface. This is a fun one. Don't worry about it. Can you just put it there? Surface of Mars, maybe? No. This is the soil in progress. This is basalt rock with the different microorganisms and different organisms growing in the basalt rock. You've got everything from lichens to mosses to whatever growing. We have a basalt area where we live, and these basalt flats where the volcanic debris had run through at one time. And the basalt is interesting to watch because I tell farmers this is soil for the future. That's what's happening here. The microbes, the plant debris, the plants, the lichens, these sorts of creatures are breaking these rocks down and making a soil that would be farmable in the future. I look at sand and rocks in a farmer's ground, and farmers mostly say, when the rocks get much bigger than this, farmer says, oh, that's detrimental to us. We don't like it. I look at rocks as being soil of the future. If you've got the microbiology going in the soil, weathering of rocks is very minor, important, or a very minor position in breaking that down into soil. It's the microbiology that's there that will break that rock particle down. Now, excuse these are beautiful colored pictures, but they don't come out very good on an overhead. These are 14-month-old grapes. Well, actually, this picture was taken at 12 months. They were 6 inches tall when we planted them. These were over 6 feet tall at the trellis. Now, what we did here, we took a complex of microbes, our Biogenesis 1, put 1 pound in 20 gallons of water. They had the flats with the square 6-inch pots with little tiny grape plants in them. And we dipped the whole flat in the liquid, pulled it out, set it over. They took it off, put it on their automated planting equipment, and we had one after another going off of one truck onto another going to their planter. Planted these plants out, and bingo, go to the next one. In 18 months, we picked, on this one, we got a little over 7 tons of grapes in 18 months per acre. This was not on a test plant. This was on a 20 and 40 acre field. Now, most of you know what grapes grow like. You've tried them in your backyard or something like that. You plant a grape plant, and if it survives, in about 5 or 10 years, you start having a few grapes. There's no logical reason for that. If you dip it in the solution, what's happening? The microbes colonize that root system as it begins to develop. They expand, they multiply. They're feeding off of exudates from that root system as they go, but not actively seeking it. So they keep all of that debris, that food debris, free and clear. Plus they produce antibiotics that keep the disease organisms from attacking it. Phytophthora won't exist if the root system is colonized with beneficial bacteria, period. Rhizoctonia, all these root diseases won't exist. Now, 31 months later, the second full crop year off of these, this went over 10 tons to the acre. Now, this is a variety of Pinot Noir, which they say nobody wanted to grow this anymore in California because they had a tough time. They would average about 1,000 to 500, or 1,500 pounds per acre. And we got 10 tons to the acre. And this particular grower had 7 wineries buying this. They were bidding against each other for this. Instead, everybody else was saying, well, the wineries don't want to take my crop this year. Everybody was after these. So, now, in the subject here, pH of the tissue in this thing, we could not get to 6.3. The best we could get was 6.2. We could not get to 6.4, rather. And simply because we should have started correcting his soils long before he decided to plant the grapes in there. And but getting that close, we get these things happening. Now, if we measure the pH of other grapes in California, most likely we'll find them at 3 or 4 pH on the tissue pH scale. Now, Walla Walla sweet onions are a gorgeous, sweet, very edible onion. You can cut a big chunk off, put it on a hamburger. It's nice when it covers the whole hamburger, but when we produce a size standard that they don't make a bun big enough or a hamburger big enough that it flops on this bun and it hangs over the edge, people say, hold it, we don't want them any bigger now. But this onion traditionally is a very poor storage onion. The Walla Walla sweet, after it's pulled out of the field, will generally have a shelf life of, when it goes to the produce dealer, has a shelf life of about 30 days. Then it begins to rot, normally. These grown under our program, however, with the microbial additive in there, these have a shelf life of about 6 months. Higher energy value in that onion. This one here had 26 onions in a 40-pound box. Average weight 1.6 pounds per onion. Now, next picture. We had a lot of them in this category. This is a $10 bill down here. It was as large as a $10 bill. The weight on this one isn't shown. Is it on there? I don't think it is on that particular picture. Okay. Weight on this one was a little bit over 3 pounds for one onion. And that makes a nice hamburger slice, by the way, if you like onions. What I tried to do is see how big we could push these things and still have the nutritional value and have the cellular integrity in that onion. And that's what's important in onion raising, is keeping the cell structure up there, which means you keep the calcium up, you keep the biology up in the soil, you keep all of these minor elements up in that onion, or you're going to put this thing on the shelf and it's going to be mush. If anybody in here ever bought fresh strawberries on the market from California, not picking on California, put them in your refrigerator when you got from the grocery store. The next day you're going to serve them, so you open the refrigerator and there's mold all over the strawberries. Yep. Okay. I get a lot of heads saying, yeah, okay. That says the energy value of that fruit was 0 at the time that you bought it. I can tell you exactly the Hertzian frequency that comes off of that strawberry when you bought it, because it's already set itself up for mold propagation. If that fruit was up at this energy level, you could put it in your refrigerator, put it out on the cupboard for a month, and it would not rot.
Hey, eco-farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres U.S.A., but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com, or see details in the notes.
How many days would a fresh market tomato picked off your vine, if it's healthy, would you expect to be able to leave it in room temperature in your kitchen and not rot? Anybody want to take a chance at that one? How many? 2 months. Okay. Anybody want to try another one? Till it dehydrates, that's correct, which would be approximately 1 year. And you should not get any rot on that tomato. How many of you have seen tomatoes like that from the grocery store lately? It's a tough situation, yeah. So, okay. Now, into cherries, into fruit trees, microbial inoculums. I felt, instead of boring you with names of microbes, which I can stand up here all day and tell you, I see these things every day. I do all my own subculture work, all my own culture maintenance and everything else. And so I know these things inside and out and all the peculiar characteristics of each microbe. But it's not going to mean anything to anybody by the time I walk out of here. I want to show you what happens when we use these things, and this is where my goal is. This is a cherry leaf. Now, the debate in the industry was, why does Bruce want such big cherry leaves? Because you want that tree producing all the energy it can to produce prime cherries, period. I want cherries for the specialty market that these brought. If I said, I got $8.40 a pound for this customer, FOB his plant for every cherry that he put out of there. $8.40 a pound. The market price on conventional cherries was less than $2. Okay, it was a good cherry price year. Last year, when the market price in California was almost barely $1 a pound, the market price that these guys got for cherries raised under our program, guess where it was at? $7.20 a pound. Okay. Now, that's because they're premium quality cherries. This company came to us. This is one of their cherry orchards. And excuse this, it doesn't show up very good, but these are trellised cherry trees. That happens to be a big poplar tree in the background. That's a windbreak tree. So it kind of confuses the issue on the poor overhead rendition here. But these are basically 1-year-old trees. They were planted out the year before this picture was taken. Now, they root dip the trees. They're bare root trees. They root dip them. Their caliper on these trees that they planted were about 1/2-inch caliper. The following year, we got a full yield of cherries. Now, was I dumb enough to put those cherries out on the branches out there? Even though they're trellised, you're going to break the branches down. Basically what I did, these are Rainiers. They're kind of a yellowish cherry, but the Japanese they like the Rainiers because of crispness, but they don't like the color. So they want them pink. We can turn them pink, all of them, very nice pink, nutritionally. Here's some pink ones coming up here. Okay, I'm upside down backwards, but never mind, that's okay. Yeah, just put it there. This is the color they want. Now, each of these cherries is about the size of a plum. And it's position problem. How many can we cluster on these trees? If the Japanese find one flawed cherry out of each kilo of cherries, they will reject the whole order. So as a consequence, the cherries get an inspection. 35 women split on two sides of a belt. Cherries go down single file. They want the stems on the cherries. They don't want them without stems. So they go down the belt. If they find one flaw in a cherry, that cherry goes into their seconds. Their seconds they get $4 to $5 a pound for in the California specialty market. That's their rejects. We get reject apples from them every year that they bring to our meetings and give them to us to distribute for people to eat at our meetings. The apples are like this. They're like a meal, the one apple. Most people can't eat a whole apple that size. And those are their rejects because they have some surface flaw on them. So, okay, these are some year-old apple trees. Well, these are actually 6-month-old. Yeah, 6 months old apple trees. These were 1/8-inch caliper trees, extremely small, of a new variety that they were trying to get going, and they didn't have very good graft sizes on them yet. And this, at the time that I took this 6 months later, this was, I had a height comparison stick on one of them, and this was over 6 feet high right at this level right here, 6 feet tall, and the canopy was forming. This particular orchard produced a bumper crop of apples the following year. It was basically a 1.5 years old in the ground. This is off of a fun project. It was an old Granny Smith orchard. And the Granny Smith orchard they were going to take out. And I said, why are you going to take it out? Because for 11 years, we've never gotten yield off this. Hill like this, pure sand soil, a few boulders scattered in between to hold the sand a little bit. And I said, okay, give me a year on that orchard, and if I can't turn that around, I'll walk away from it and you can take it out. These old trees are beautiful to work with because they have wood structure strength. You can put loads on there that you can't do on a brand new tree. And I'm very conscientious about putting the load where I want it. I can put the load of cherries on the main trunk if that's where I feel it has to be because of no branch structure strength yet. That's what we kind of passed over that. Those Rainier cherries that were showed that cluster down there, that was on the trunk of the tree. That was not on the branch. Now the second year production on that, I've got them all geared to go down the trunk, a little bit on those branches close to the tree. Normally cherries produce out on the ends. There's a little biological nutritional trick to put them where you want them on that tree. Now lots of industries have problems with height of trees. These big old avocado trees they have to use a 30-foot extension ladder plus a pole, extension pole, and a little basket on to pick avocados. And so pretty soon they can't reach their trees without safety problems, and boy, there's safety problems in that industry. People falling off ladders 30 foot tall, and they say, well, because we don't get any branch growth on the bottom of the tree. Excuse me, shift your nutrition. We can get branch growth, and we can get fruit set any place you want that on that tree. All it takes is an understanding of nutrition and what's going on in that tree at the time. So we can do things with these trees. We can resurrect old trees. This is another example. This tree here was it was planted the year before. It wasn't quite full, 1 year old at the time that this bloom took place. The goal here was to try to get central core bud tissue and not so much on the branch tissue. The next one shows another thing. We were able to load up the trunk. This is the trunk of the tree. It looks like fuzz on there. If somebody asked me if that was snow on there, no, it isn't. That's blossoms. This is a plum tree. And we loaded that blossom factor in here rather than out on the way out on the branches out in the ends out here, no man's land, because it would have broken down that young tree. Now, obviously, this is too many blossoms to fruit. One of the complaints I have from the fruit industry is we set too many blossoms, and that we put too many blossoms on there. But it's a good problem to deal with. We can deal with it nutritionally and make those drop the weaker ones very easily, and do nutritional thinning rather than chemical thinning on them. So, Tina, go ahead. How's time doing? Oh boy. Okay. As ever. Okay. Winter wheat. Most people say winter wheat, your high-density varieties of winter wheat, by the time your head is coming out of the boot, your plant is deteriorating very badly. And most farmers say, well, my plant is dead and dry, and the head is still taking nutrition and everything from that plant, and it's still not quite dry yet. They're waiting for the head to dry out there and the kernels to dry down. This is a winter wheat variety that, with nutrition shifts, the head dries first, the plant's still green. And everybody says, well, how do you harvest it? Harvest fine. This head, by the time this plant dries down in another 2 weeks, this head is so dry that, it harvests fine, not a problem. Even though the straw is a little bit on the chewy side we don't have a harvest problem. This particular variety is one that I developed, and I developed it because I wanted to prove to people I was still a plant breeder and that I could develop something good. This one we hit on commercial production over 200 bushels to the acre. Now, it was killed by a university program. And the reason it was killed by the university program was it was bulk shipped with 9 other hard red winter wheats. This one was accused of low protein. And if farmers would follow my program and my recommendation on this, nitrogen doesn't build the success in this. Balancing nitrogen, potassium, and calcium builds the success in this. And can you afford to do it with 200 bushel wheat? Sure you can. You're making good money, even at the low wheat prices. My goal was, I hear farmers gripe in our area a lot about the price of wheat. Price of wheat's down so low, we're not making any money. Can't afford the diesel to drive our tractor. What's the key to this? Get better yields. Jump it up. Price of fuel goes up, 20%. Price of fertilizer goes up 20%, use 20% less fertilizer and do a better job. That's the key. Doesn't do any good to go to the coffee shop and talk about it all day. Okay. Anyway, go ahead. Oh, okay. There's another one up here. She's just pushing me hard. You must be watching Fred over there. Picture perfect roses with biocaps. We also put microbes in little gelatin capsules. And if anybody is a product dealer for us, I tell them, or a customer, farmer, you want to make a friend out of the farmer, give him a bag of the biocaps. Tell him to take them home, put them on his wife's roses. Just poke a hole by the rose plant, drop the capsule in, cover it up. Make sure you cover it up. If you don't, if he's got a dog, in 2 days the dog's going to dig it up. If he's got a cat, in 1 day the cat's going to dig it up and eat it. The cat won't die, the dog won't die. They'll be awfully hungry for a few days because it's good digestion aid. So, but anyway, they get picture perfect roses. Then suddenly I go out there and say, Mr. Farmer, would you like to buy our biological program? His wife is there saying, buy it, buy it. Look what it did to our roses. So we get into a lot of exotics. This was an apartment complex, a huge condo complex down in California, where they transplanted these large, very mature palm trees. They all start dying. And this is a case where the biocaps, the big ones, the 13-gram capsules, I kid people, they're large suppositories, and you poke a hole at the drip line of the tree, put several of these in the case where the tree is dying, and suddenly the tree is resurrected. The power of microbes are incredible in this whole thing. Go ahead. Usually at the drip line of the tree, we put them down 6 to 8 inches deep is all. Poke a hole, whatever's convenient. We're doing 18,000 some trees for the city of Victoria right now. They're dying because of mismanagement of the trees. And the beauty of the city of Victoria is their trees on their streets. And so we also do a 17,600 acre tree farm for potlatch forest. And we're resurrecting dying trees there like crazy. So this is other applications for microbes. This is a pond. Some of you have seen this if you went to our booth. This, you could throw a rock out on it. It was a 6-inch size rock. It would sit on top of the water. This is water. This is a core boat. It's flat bottom. It would ride right up on top. They had to put a guy out here with an oar to cut a little path through it so he could get the boat through it. We have water cleanup microbes that we use for cleaning up water. And in this project was 45 days later. It was done under the inspection and the control of the Army Corps of Engineers. Crystal clear lake. There was absolutely no trace of algae or excessive plant growth in this lake in 45 days. We did it with microbial management and managing the oxygen level in there with one of my other inventions, which is floating out there, a little solar panel, a little control box, and there's an antenna floating someplace over. Oh, it's over right here. The antenna floats, but it stays underwater. It just held in place underwater. This is one of our other sideline projects. We're now cleaning up toxic waste ponds, leachates coming off of toxic waste dumps. The water is being salvaged, put into small lakes or ponds. They can't do anything with it. We have microbial programs that will clean that up. We have methods of detoxifying it so that we can put microbes in it, won't kill them off no matter what chemical they got in there, and these sorts of things. So we're on the edge of new science and a lot of different methods here. Okay, got 5 minutes. The microbiology of the soil, the microbiology of lakes and ponds is basically almost identical. Ponds, no oxygen, microbes change their form, they're facultative anaerobes, they change to anaerobic states. Anaerobic state microbes in a water body, what do? They ferment the organic debris. Fermented organic debris produces what? Alcohol. It causes a degradation of the water and goes downhill. In the soil, the same thing happens. Low oxygen in the soil. Plant can't get potassium under low oxygen levels. Why? Microbes are shifted to an anaerobic state. They're producing alcohol. The plant doesn't like alcohol either. If you ever take one of these irrigated, really old real irrigated fields and look out at the end of the rills, where the plant height is only this tall, where it floods out at the end of the rills, and as you go further in the field, the plants get taller and taller on corn plants. Cut one of these plants off, let it pump the liquid for a while. It'll keep pumping juice. It's trying to get liquid up in it. And take a drop of liquid off of there. Where those plants are dwarfed like this, what's there? Alcohol, high level of alcohol in that sap. because that floodplain at the end of those real irrigation areas caused a starvation of oxygen. The microbes switched to anaerobic state. They're producing alcohol, which is killing the plant or inhibiting the plant. There's less inhibition as you go, or less inhibiting occurring as you go further into the field, away from that flood end area. So microbes are fun things to work with. They're our friends. And we have marvelous things. The Cherry Project, I don't know whether I said this here because I've said it several times today. We took them from $220,000 income on 35 acres to $1.8 million on same 35 acres in 1 year. Second year, we took them to $2.6 million. Third year, we took them over $3 million. Fourth year, this year, the fourth year, we took them over $4 million off of the same identical 35 acres. The difference was they had 2% of their cherries made quality cherries for this market when we started. Now 98.4% made quality cherries for their market this year. And their yields are going up along with it. And these are people that nutritionally analyze the cherry. I take that cherry, feed it to a diabetic. It doesn't spike his blood sugar. The diabetic can sit there, eat these things all day long. No blood sugar change. Yet, go to the grocery store, buy Rainier cherries. We've done this. Take them 3 Rainier cherries. The diabetic gets in a panic. His blood sugar spiked through the roof. So talk about nutrition balance and benefits. We see this in all kinds of food that we're dealing with. That's why I say we need to develop a concentrated program in nutritional balance in agriculture. The heck with the organic concept, because organic, the only thing it ensures is freedom from chemicals, maybe. As the government got into this, as we get in deeper into this organic thing and more people get into it, I see more violations of this no chemical thing going on. Yet the inspectors are not adequately picking it up. So are we going to have a safe mental image of that organic certification in the future? We've got to come up with something. Now, organic doesn't mean it's nutritionally balanced. I did lots of testing. Get organic produce produced by the same farm, carrots, lettuce, whatever. Over here, they're producing non-organic stuff. Pouring the fertilizer to it. Nutritional analysis showed every case, not one exception. Nutrition balance was better in the conventional than the organic because they didn't know how to stay within the regulations and how to supplement their soils in a correct manner to raise organic food. And I see this time and time again. So I play the middle of the road thing. Hey guys, don't convince me your organic's better until we get a nutritional analysis off of it. Then we'll tell you whether it's better or not. Because it doesn't do us any good. We have one thing for certain. In this world, 3/4 of the population of the world go to bed hungry every night. 3/4. 1/3 of the population, including the United States, have one assurance: and we can eat ourselves to death. 1/3 of the population can do that, of the world. And why do we eat ourselves to death? Because of nutritional imbalance. Why are we consuming so much food? Because of nutritional imbalance. When we balance nutrition with microbes in the intestinal system of rabbits, the rabbit eats 30% less food, digests it more efficiently. The rabbit gains more weight on young bunnies where you want them to gain weight. So what is this telling us? We need to pay attention to these details in our programs and not say, oh, we're organic. I choose to eat organic because it's a little bit more assurance I'm not going to eat pesticides. Only a little bit. That's getting less and less and less sure as this program gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I walk into situations in fields which I know there are being chemicals used, yet the certification is still for organic. And lots of them. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a podcast production of Acres U.S.A. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.